Okay? So let me ask you something before we begin. Yesterday evening, June 11th, 2026, President Donald Trump walked out in front of the cameras and made an announcement. And this announcement was, I quote, "We ended the war with Iran today. They have agreed never to have a nuclear weapon. We got everything we wanted." Okay? Wall Street immediately went crazy. The Dow Jones jumped 1.75%. The Nasdaq shot up 2.54%. Investors were relieved. Breaking news banners everywhere. Every major network was running the same story. Deal reached, war over, Trump wins. And then, not even 3 hours later, Iran's foreign ministry appeared and said something very simple. They said, Iran has not yet reached a final conclusion on any agreement. Okay? Now here is the part one, really want you to sit with. This is not the first time this has happened. Iran's Tasnim news agency, which is linked directly to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, they actually counted. They went back and counted every single time Trump announced that a deal was imminent. Every single time he said the war was about to end. The number they came up with is 38. 38 times in 2 months. And yesterday was number 39. Okay? So now every news channel in the world is asking the obvious question. Is this time different? Is this real? Or is this just another false alarm? But that is not the question I want to ask today. The question I want to ask, and this is the question almost nobody in the mainstream media is asking, is this one. Why does Trump keep doing this? Why does he keep announcing victories that don't materialize? And more importantly, why does Iran keep letting him do it? Why don't they just shut it down completely? Because here is what I want to argue to you today. And I want you to really pay attention because this is going to change how you look at this entire conflict. What is happening between the United States and Iran right now is not primarily a military war. Okay? The bombs and the drones and the naval blockades, those are real. But they are not where this war is actually being decided. This war is being decided on a battlefield that most military analysts don't have a map for. A battlefield with no missiles, no aircraft carriers, no radar systems. The battlefield is the human mind. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how Iran, a nation with a fraction of America's military budget, is fighting and winning on that battlefield. And then I'm going to show you the third player in this game, the one who isn't on the battlefield at all, the one who is just sitting quietly and collecting the money. All right, let's go. Okay? First thing, I want to introduce a concept. And this concept is the key to understanding everything that is happening right now. I call it cognitive warfare. Now, what is cognitive warfare? Very simple idea. Instead of destroying your enemy's infrastructure, you destroy their will. You go after their beliefs. You go after their perception of reality. You make them believe something that is not entirely true, or you make them doubt something that is. Okay? And to understand why this is so powerful, I want you to think about something. You guys know Plato's cave, right? Plato's cave. Let me remind you. Plato asks you to imagine a cave. There is a blank wall in front of a group of prisoners. They are all chained. They cannot move. They cannot look behind them. Behind them, there is a great fire. And there are certain people, Plato just calls them they, who take shadows and project these shadows onto the wall. And the prisoners, because they have never seen anything else, they believe these shadows are reality itself. Okay? The shadows are their world. The shadows are what they name things after. The shadows are what they build their entire understanding of life around. Now, the question Plato is asking, and this is the important question, is who controls the shadows? Who decides what the prisoners see? In the context of modern geopolitics, the answer has always been governments and mainstream media. The White House issues a statement. CNN runs the story. The public believes it. That is how the system has operated for decades. But here is what Iran figured out, and this is genuinely fascinating. With the rise of social media and artificial intelligence, for the first time in human history, a smaller, militarily weaker nation can project its own shadows directly onto the wall of its enemy's cave without a single missile. Okay? Does that make sense? What Iran is doing is not trying to defeat the American military. That is not their goal. Their goal is to defeat the will of the American people. To make Americans believe this war cannot be won. To make Americans tired. to make Americans turn to their government and say, why are we still here? What are we doing? This is not worth it. And if they succeed at that, then they don't need to shoot down a single F-35. The American people will force their own government to withdraw. That is cognitive warfare. And it is the most sophisticated form of war being fought in the world today. Okay? So how exactly is Iran doing this? What are the actual weapons? Weapon number one, and I want you to really pay attention to this one because this is genuinely new in human history. The weapon is generative AI and deepfakes. All right, the cyber warfare unit of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has launched a large-scale cognitive campaign. And this campaign does not use bombs, it uses images, it uses video. Specifically, they have created and distributed AI-generated videos, completely fake, completely manufactured, with content like this. A nuclear mushroom cloud rising above an American city. American soldiers with their hands up, surrendering to Iranian forces. Volleys of Iranian missiles raining down on high-rise buildings in the United States. Okay? Now stop. I want to ask you something. What happens in your body when you see an image like that? Even if you know it is fake, the answer, and this is supported by neuroscience, is that the human brain cannot fully distinguish between a real image and a convincing fake image once your emotional response has been activated. Once fear is triggered, once your heart rate goes up, once your brain shifts into survival mode, then someone telling you it's just a deep fake doesn't completely undo the damage. The image has already been encoded in your memory. The emotional residue stays. And this is exactly what Iran is exploiting. Iran doesn't need Americans to believe the mushroom cloud is real. They don't need people to think the soldiers really surrendered. What they need is to create what I call a collective cognitive horizon, a shared background feeling that spreads through American society, that this war is going in a very bad direction, that we might lose, that the cost is too high. And once that collective feeling exists, even if it is based partly on manufactured images, it converts into political pressure. Political pressure forces senators to speak out. Senators speaking out forces Trump to respond. Trump responding means he goes back on social media and announces another breakthrough deal to calm things down. And we get number 40, okay? You see the loop? This is not random. This is engineered. This is a designed feedback cycle. And Iran is running it deliberately. Now, the really interesting thing about this strategy is that it is almost impossible to counter effectively. Because how do you fight fake images? You put out a statement saying they are fake, but the statement reaches people who are already calm. The fake image already reached people when they were scrolling at midnight, half asleep, and it activated their fear response before their rational mind could evaluate it. The psychological damage is done before the fact check arrives. That is the power of the deepfake weapon in cognitive warfare. Okay? Weapon number 2. And this one comes from political science. And I think it is actually even more clever than the deepfake strategy. I want to introduce you to something called the median voter theorem. Now let me explain this in the simplest possible way. In any democratic society, you can roughly divide the population into 3 groups. Group 1, let's say about 35%, are people who absolutely support the war. They believe America must win. They believe Iran must be destroyed or neutralized. Nothing you say will change their minds. That's fine. That's normal. Group 3, roughly another 30%, are people who absolutely oppose the war. They were on the streets protesting from day one. Also, nothing will change their minds. So the question is, who actually decides the political outcome? The group in the middle, the remaining 35%, the people without a hardened ideological position, the people who read the news but don't follow it obsessively, the people worried about rent, about gas prices, about their kids' futures, the people who don't really want war but haven't yet committed to actively opposing it. These are the people Iran is targeting, not the hawks, not the doves, the 35% in the middle who haven't made up their minds. Because here is the thing, Iran does not need and cannot convert the 35% who are committed war supporters. That is a waste of resources. What they need to do is shift the median voter. Nudge the people in the middle, just enough that they start asking uncomfortable questions, just enough that they feel uneasy. Just enough that they would prefer their politician to find an exit rather than an escalation. And how do you shift the median voter? You don't need propaganda. You don't need them to become anti-American. You just need them to feel tired, overwhelmed, doubtful. You flood the information space with images of Iranian civilians suffering. You show gas prices climbing. You show Goldman Sachs downgrading growth forecasts. You highlight every mistake the American military makes. You amplify every statement from a European ally criticizing the war. You make the war feel expensive, endless, and unwinnable. And look at the polling numbers. Trump's approval rating on the Iran war right now sits at 37%. 37%. Do you know what that means? That is essentially just his base. The 35% who support the war unconditionally. The middle has already shifted. Iran has already moved the median voter. Does that make sense? The war on the battlefield might be going one direction, but the war inside the American political system is going a very different direction. And that second war is the one that determines whether this conflict continues. Okay? Weapon number 3. And this one is a little more academic, but I want to walk you through it because it explains something very specific about why Trump keeps making these announcements and then walking them back. There's an important concept in media theory called framing theory. The basic idea is this. It doesn't matter what event occurs. What matters is the frame you put around it, the label you give it, the context you embed it in. The same event can be framed in completely different ways, and each frame will produce a completely different reaction from the audience. Okay? Simple example, American forces shoot down 2 Iranian drones over the Strait of Hormuz. The American frame, self-defense against Iranian aggression. The Iranian frame, illegal military provocation violating international navigation rights. Same event. 2 completely different stories. Now, the United States is historically very good at what we call episodic framing. This means focusing on specific tactical events, day by day, incident by incident. Today we shot down this drone. Today we seized this tanker. Today we bombed these radar systems. It creates a sense of constant action, constant progress. It keeps the narrative kinetic and fast moving. But here is the fatal weakness of episodic framing. When you rely on it, you become extraordinarily vulnerable to what I call mistake magnification. Because in the era of social media, one small tactical mistake by one soldier can instantly be amplified into a strategic catastrophe. The camera is always rolling, the world is always watching, and your enemies know exactly which moments to amplify. On June 10th, American forces struck a target in the Bamani region, and they accidentally destroyed a freshwater storage facility. 20,000 Iranian civilians lost access to clean drinking water, a tactical mistake, quite possibly unintentional. But the images of Iranian children without water, those images spread faster than any CENTCOM press briefing could respond. Iran and its media allies immediately took that single incident and used it to blow apart the entire American narrative of precision strikes protecting regional stability. One mistake, catastrophic information consequences. And here is the deeper problem. Because America relies on this episodic frame, the we are doing good things every day frame. Any single bad image can bring the whole structure down. It's like a building with no structural redundancy. One crack in the right place and the whole facade collapses. Iran understood this. They designed their information strategy specifically to find those cracks and pry them open. Okay? Now I want to do something important. I want to present the strongest possible argument against everything I have said so far, because I never want you to just accept what I tell you without thinking it through. Here is the steel man. Here is the best version of the opposing argument. The United States has the most powerful military on earth. Full stop. American aircraft carriers can project force anywhere in the world within 72 hours. The American Air Force has precision weapons that can hit a target the size of a car from 500 miles away. The CENTCOM strikes in early June destroyed over 20 Iranian military targets, air defense systems, ground control stations, surveillance radar networks, drone command units in a single operation. And the US Navy has successfully maintained a maritime blockade that is strangling Iran's oil exports. Cognitive warfare is interesting. Deepfakes are clever. But at the end of the day, military power is military power. Economic pressure is economic pressure. Iran's economy was already struggling before this war, and now it is being crushed. The rial has collapsed. Unemployment is spiking. No amount of social media manipulation changes the fact that Iran is running out of money, running out of parts for its military equipment, and running out of diplomatic options. The real war is a war of attrition, and America wins wars of attrition. Okay? That is the steel man. And it is a genuinely strong argument. It has historical precedent. America has won wars through economic and military pressure before. But here's what the steel man cannot account for. If American military power is so decisive, why did Trump cancel the scheduled airstrikes last night? Why did he go on Fox News and admit his exact words that he wasn't sure America had the stomach for the kind of military campaign that would actually force a conclusion? If economic pressure is crushing Iran, why is Iran still refusing to accept the American negotiating framework? Why is Iran's foreign ministry still saying there is no final decision on any deal? Why are Iranian officials publicly saying that American military pressure has made the ceasefire meaningless rather than making them more desperate to surrender? Because military power only forces a surrender if the political will to keep using it remains intact. And that political will, right here in Washington, in the halls of Congress, in the polling data, is eroding. Not because Iran's missiles are accurate, but because Iran's information campaign is working, because the median voter is shifting, because allies are withdrawing support, because the framing machine is cracking. The steel man ignores the fact that wars in modern democracies are not won or lost only on battlefields. They are won or lost in living rooms, in comment sections, in the quiet moment when a senator looks at his approval ratings and decides it is no longer worth defending the president's policy. Iran is not trying to outlast America militarily. They're trying to outlast America politically. And right now, the evidence suggests they are succeeding. Okay? Now I want to add one more dimension to this picture. Because if you have only been watching the United States and Iran, you have been missing the most important player in this entire story. And I want to make a prediction right now. The player I am about to describe is the one that will emerge from this conflict with the greatest strategic advantage. Not America, not Iran. The player is China, okay? Let me explain. Because on the surface, this seems counterintuitive. On television, President Xi Jinping is calling for an immediate end to hostilities in the Middle East. He's expressing concern about supply chain disruptions. China's state media is running stories about the economic damage the war is causing to global trade. And Western analysts keep saying China is vulnerable. They import 80% of their energy needs through sea lanes, that this war is disrupting. That is the narrative on the surface. And most people accept it. But now let me show you what is actually happening. First, the war in the Strait of Hormuz has disrupted global oil supply. Oil prices have spiked globally. You would think this hurts China, right? China needs oil. Higher oil prices mean higher costs for Chinese industry. Except, here's the thing everyone is missing. Russia, because of Western sanctions, cannot sell its oil to Europe. Russia has no other major buyer except China. So Russia is desperate to keep Beijing happy. And China is exploiting this desperation ruthlessly. Beijing is buying Russian energy at massive discounts, prices significantly below market rate. They are using Russia's isolation as a negotiating weapon. So while the rest of the world is paying spiked oil prices, China is buying Russian energy at a discount. That is a structural competitive advantage for Chinese manufacturing. That is a gift. And the war in the Middle East is what makes that gift possible because it keeps oil prices high for everyone else, while Russia remains locked out of alternative markets. Second, here's the deeper play. China currently accounts for approximately 35% of Russia's total foreign trade. They supply over 60% of Russia's critical components, including dual-use technology that ends up in military equipment. Russia now depends on China the way it used to depend on Europe. Except China is not a friend. China is a creditor. And Beijing is not being generous about this relationship. They keep delaying the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline agreement, a major natural gas deal that Russia desperately needs, until Moscow agrees to more favorable commercial terms. They are squeezing every possible concession out of Russia before they agree to anything. In other words, China is converting Russia from a rival into a dependent, from a peer into a client state. And they are doing it quietly without firing a shot, while the world is watching the fireworks over the Strait of Hormuz. Third, the silence itself is a weapon. China has not condemned Iran's actions. They voted against the IAEA resolution criticizing Iran's nuclear program. They voted against the snapback sanctions at the UN Security Council. They are providing Iran with diplomatic protection in every international forum. But China is also publicly calling for peace, publicly expressing concern about economic disruption, publicly performing the role of the responsible great power who just wants stability. This is what I call two-faced diplomacy, and it is extraordinarily sophisticated. By performing concern about the war, China avoids secondary sanctions from the West. By protecting Iran at the UN, China locks in strategic loyalty from Tehran for the future. By buying Russian oil at a discount, China undercuts Russia's bargaining position globally. And by staying militarily uninvolved, China preserves all of its options. Think about what Xi Jinping has done here. He welcomed both Trump and Putin to Beijing within the same month. He is simultaneously managing relationships with the country that is fighting the war, the country that is benefiting from the war economically, and the country that is trying to end the war. He is the only leader in this entire crisis who has leverage over all three sides at once. While Trump is on his 39th announcement and trying to find an off-ramp, while Iran is fighting a cognitive war against American public opinion, while Russia is selling oil and watching its own economy quietly slip into Chinese dependency, China is just sitting there, reading the board, and getting richer. Okay? Let that sink in for a moment. The person who is winning this war most decisively is the person who isn't in it. Okay? So let me bring this all together, because I think when you see these three things side by side, the picture becomes very clear. Iran's cognitive warfare strategy has three components, remember? The deepfake campaign creates a collective psychological environment where Americans feel uncertain, afraid, and doubtful about the war's outcome, even when tactical military results favor the United States. The media and voter strategy shifts to 35% of Americans who don't have fixed positions, moving them from neutral to skeptical, from skeptical to opposed, from opposed to politically active. And that political activism pressures Congress, pressures allies, and ultimately pressures Trump himself. The exploitation of America's episodic framing weakness means that every single tactical mistake by American forces becomes a strategic communication disaster. One bombed water facility, one Indian tanker crew killed in a crossfire. Each incident becomes ammunition in Iran's narrative that the United States is not a force for stability, but a force for destruction. And the result? 39 announcements from Trump about deals that aren't finalized. European allies publicly criticizing American leadership. Congressional members calling the war unconstitutional. Approval ratings stuck at 37%. A president who openly wonders on live television whether America has the stomach for the military campaign he himself ordered. Iran does not need to win on the battlefield to win this war. They just need to make the battlefield politically untenable for America, and they are doing it. Meanwhile, China observes. China waits. China collects. Okay? So what do we actually do with all of this? Let me give you three very specific things to watch over the next 48 to 72 hours. First, watch whether Iran formally approves any memorandum of understanding. Reports suggest a draft MOU would immediately reopen the Strait of Hormuz, lift the U.S. blockade, extend the ceasefire for 60 days, and leave nuclear negotiations for a later stage. If Iran signs, that tells you they believe the cognitive warfare campaign has done enough damage. They've gotten the off-ramp they needed without surrendering their core positions. If Iran continues to delay, that tells you the campaign is still running. They think more pressure will extract better terms. Second, watch Benjamin Netanyahu. Because here is something that American analysts keep underestimating. Trump can offer Iran security guarantees on behalf of the United States, but he cannot offer security guarantees on behalf of Israel. Netanyahu has his own political pressures, his own constituency, his own domestic reasons to want this conflict to continue. If Israel launches another unilateral strike against Iran while the MOU is being finalized, the entire diplomatic framework collapses overnight. And Trump's 39th announcement becomes a 39th failure. So watch Netanyahu. He is the variable that Trump cannot control. Third, watch the price of oil and watch Beijing's next statement. Here is my prediction. If China begins to actively push Iran towards signing, if Beijing's tone shifts from passive calls for peace to specific diplomatic pressure, that will tell you that China has decided it has extracted enough benefit from the chaos. It has bought enough discounted Russian energy. It has locked in enough geopolitical loyalty from Tehran. And now it wants the trade routes to reopen so Chinese exports can flow normally again. When China decides the chaos is no longer profitable, that is when the war will end. Not because of Trump's tweets, not because of Iran's missiles, because Beijing finally decided it was time. Okay? And your homework, I want you to read two things. Read the full statement from Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Bagheri from June 12th, the one published by AFP. Read every word of it carefully. Notice what he says and notice what he doesn't say. Notice the specific language he uses about American inconsistency. That language is not diplomatic boilerplate. That is a signal. And then read any analysis from the International Crisis Group on Iran's negotiating red lines. Because the thing that most Western media gets wrong about Iran is that Tehran has very clearly defined what they will and will not accept. The problem is that the American side keeps adding new conditions after agreements are nearly reached, and then acting surprised when Iran doesn't sign. And after you read both, push back on me. Find the weakest point in what I've argued today. Because I am not saying this analysis is 100% correct. I never say that. What I am saying is that this framework helps us observe what is actually happening beneath the surface of the breaking news cycle. And the only way a framework gets better is if people challenge it seriously. Okay? So I will leave you with this. Let's say hypothetically that an agreement is signed next week. In Europe, as Trump has suggested, J.D. Vance flies out to put his name on the document, and then both sides hold press conferences. Trump stands at the podium and says, America won. We destroyed Iran's air defenses. We maintained the blockade. We forced them to give up their nuclear program. We got everything we wanted. America is great again. And the Iranian leadership stands at their podium and says, Iran won. We withstood 40 days of American and Israeli bombardment. We kept the Strait of Hormuz under our control. We extracted security guarantees. We protected our missile program. We showed the world that the resistance does not bend. Both of them will be telling a version of the truth. Both of them will be speaking to their domestic audiences, managing their own political survival. Both of them will perform victory. But here is the question I want you to sit with after this video ends. If both sides claim victory, if the bombs stop falling, if the ships start moving to Hormuz again, who actually won? And more importantly, who won without ever having to fight at all? Think about that. Really think about it. Because the answer tells you everything about where power actually lives in the world today. It's not in the aircraft carrier. It's not in the missile battery. It's not even in the algorithm that generates the deepfake. The power is in the ability to read the board, to let others exhaust themselves, and to collect the winnings when the table clears. Okay? I will see you in the next video.